Hello everyone. Life is always stranger than fiction, and sometimes it can be worse than all the fictional novels we have read before. People often say that even fierce tigers don't eat their cubs. But in this world, there are mothers who are willing to end their children's lives. The Diane Downs case is proof of that. She showed us that there are no limits to life and human behavior. You are watching The Evil Mother Case, Murdered 3 Children to Please Her Lover, on the Crime Channel. And as usual, if this story leaves an impression on you, don't hesitate to leave a like as encouragement for us. And if this is the first time we meet, follow the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated with the most classic cases. The main character in today's case is Diane Downs, who had a perfect marriage with her high school sweetheart named Stephen Downs, and they got married in 1973. They were considered a happy family with 3 children named Christy, Cheryl Lynn, and Stephen Daniel. However, in 1980, Stephen decided to divorce Diane. The reason for the divorce was that Stephen suspected Diane was pregnant with a young lover named Danny. During their marriage, the couple was always arguing about money and doubting each other's loyalty. As for Diane, after the divorce, she thought her young lover would accept the baby in her womb. However, Danny avoided responsibility and abandoned her, and to hold on to her young lover, Diane acted foolishly and inhumanely to the point where the whole world had to denounce her. On May 19, 1983, despite it being nighttime, the weather was still as hot as daytime at Springfield Hill, Oregon, where Diane lived. On this unusually quiet evening, few knew that the strange silence was a harbinger before a big wave hit. As predicted, a horrific tragedy occurred in front of Mackenzie Willamette Hospital at 10:48 p.m. on May 19th. Everyone was shocked because there were no signs until Diane's red Nissan car drove straight into the parking lot while honking frantically as if wanting to explode everything. The emergency horn was so urgent that everyone who heard it sensed something terrible was happening. Dr. John Mary and 2 nurses, Rose Martin and Shelby, saw what appeared to be a blonde woman in her 20s, waving at them on the driveway just outside the double automatic doors of the emergency room. The girl looked pale under the streetlights and was frantically pointing inside the red Nissan as if something horrible had happened inside. The girl tried to explain that someone had shot all the people in the car. At this point, Nurse Martin tremblingly approached the car, and when they looked through the car door, the side windows were soaked in blood. Inside were 3 children, 1 child in the front passenger seat and 2 children in the back seat who appeared to be lifeless. They weren't moving, and blood was soaking the back of the car. After observation, the nurses could say that the children had been shot at close range. And of course, the blonde 20-year-old girl reporting the incident certainly wasn't the perpetrator. Among the 3 children, one was about 7-8 years old. The 2 children in the back were a girl about 8 years old and a toddler who had just learned to walk. 2 of them were still breathing, but the child slumped in the front seat appeared to be lifeless despite the surgeon's best efforts. After receiving the 3 children, the doctors learned their personal information, including Stephen Daniel, 3 years old, Cheryl Lynn, 7 years old, and Christy, 8 years old. The notable question here was who could be so cold-blooded and cruel to point a gun at these 3 innocent children. At this time, the victim's mother, Diane, appeared and told the hospital receptionist, Perron, that she and her family were on their way home from a friend's house in the nearby area of Marcola when a strange man with thick hair waved at them on the deserted highway. After approaching, Diane opened the door, and he pointed his pistol through the car window and pulled the trigger in front of the 3 frightened children inside the car. The Springfield and Lane County Police felt quite suspicious about what Diane reported. Nevertheless, the authorities issued an emergency alert on the city and county highways about information of a madman wandering on the lanes and side roads in the suburbs of Springfield. The area identified as the attack point near Marcola and Mohawk Road suddenly became the center of attention. Employees of the Lane County Sheriff's Office were assigned as the main investigators of the case. Officer Robin Rutherford was the first county officer to approach Diane, the children's mother, when he arrived at the hospital. The nurses had treated Diane's arm with a series of small wounds between her elbow and wrist from allegedly trying to fend off the gunman's attack. The wounds on Diane's body were very light, and everyone felt she was unusually calm. After first aid for the wounds, police urged Diane to report the exact location of the incident as detailed as possible. However, the location she recalled near the intersection of two rural roads was an unlikely place for a young woman with 3 children to stop and talk to a stranger, as it was very deserted. When Diane returned to the hospital, she was informed that her second child had died. However, her attitude showed no grief but was extremely clear-headed and calm, which surprised the nursing staff. Why wouldn't a woman cry when her child dies? When the nurse informed her that her youngest child, Daniel, might have a chance of survival, Diane's panicked and confused attitude made everyone puzzled. Diane anxiously asked the nurse if it was possible that the bullet didn't hit the baby's head. The detectives interviewed her in a private room at Mackenzie-Willamette Hospital and were very surprised by her demeanor. The county homicide investigation team's Dick Tracy, an experienced detective in case investigation, noticed she was unlike other women he had previously met after similar emergencies. Similarly, Detective Dow also thought Diane was too strange given what had just happened to her family. During the investigation, police gathered information about Diane and followed the sequence of events. They discovered that the bullets fired at the children were from a .22 caliber, fired from either a pistol or rifle. Police suspected powder burns on the children's flesh came from close-range shots, especially on the deceased child named Cheryl, who sat in the front seat. Blood splattered all over the car door, seats, windows, and other surfaces in the car. This indicated the shooter had fired from the left side or driver's side. Through investigation, police discovered Diane was formerly a postal worker for the U.S. Postal Service. She had worked as a mail carrier in Chandler, Arizona, but after her divorce had moved to Oregon to be closer to her parents, Mr. Wes and Mrs. Willadine Fredrickson. The Fredricksons were former Arizona residents who had moved to Oregon many years ago when Wes Fredrickson worked at the post office. Diane recounted the events of that night to her interviewers. Earlier, she and her children had dinner and left their small apartment at 1352 Kelly Street in Springfield to visit a colleague's house on rustic Sunderman Road. Heather Potter was a colleague who had told Diane at work a few days before that she was thinking about buying a horse. By chance, Diane had found a newspaper ad about horse rentals that she thought Heather might be interested in. So Diane drove to Heather's house, intending to hand-deliver the rental location information to her colleague. Diane thought this was also a good opportunity for the 3 children to get out and enjoy the air instead of staying in the stuffy house. Diane decided to take the old Mohawk Road to the main highway on the way home after a brief conversation with Heather and her husband. Diane thought it would be fun to tour around there, and the children would love looking at the moon. Unfortunately, here Diane encountered the stranger. After stopping the car, he pulled a pistol from his jacket pocket and demanded her car keys. Of course, Diane refused, and the man reached through the driver's window and shot at her family. According to Diane's testimony, when he tried to take the keys, she fought back but couldn't succeed, so she retreated into her car, and this time he shot at her again, wounding her in the arm. Her Nissan sped away when she slammed the car shut. Her children were in pain, and she had only one thought: to get them to the hospital as soon as possible. Diane told police that the slight wound on her arm was from the stranger's attack, but she had tried to fight back, causing the bullet to graze her wrist, breaking the car window and leaving a fairly light wound. However, police suspected the wound on Diane's arm was self-inflicted to stage a fake crime scene, so they ordered a search of Diane's house. Before police conducted the search, Diane admitted to having a .38 caliber pistol for protection while delivering mail and a .22 caliber rifle for family security, but said neither worked, one hidden under fabric scraps in the trunk, while the other was covered in dust. Additionally, authorities prepared equipment to take Diane's red Nissan to the crime lab for further investigation. Everyone understood finding the perpetrator was extremely important, as this was an inhumane act. When Diane was allowed into the intensive care unit to see Christy, one of her 2 surviving children, many nurses and an investigator standing by the hospital bed said she held her daughter's hand and whispered, "Mommy loves you very much," in a very unusual way. She did it cold as ice, her words coming through clenched teeth, which made investigator Paul Anton realize something was truly wrong. When little Christy saw her mother arrive, the child's eyes looking out from behind the oxygen mask began to suspect her mother. Diane's story about what happened that night had changed after multiple interrogations, especially the inconsistencies about the location where she was attacked. When investigator Dow interviewed Steve Downs, Diane's ex-husband, he provided valuable information that Diane owned 3 guns, not 2, including a .22 caliber pistol that Diane hadn't mentioned. The complete crime scene search yielded no results except for .22 caliber shell casings nearby. Divers even went down the Mohawk River near the crime scene, went past the train, but they couldn't find the rifle that Diane described the perpetrator had used. All investigators didn't believe there was a man who had blocked and assaulted Diane's entire family. Meanwhile, Christy's health condition was deteriorating. She had suffered a stroke as a direct consequence of the gunshot wound. The girl's speech was stuttering, and doctors had said Christy might never speak again because the left brain that controls speaking ability had been damaged. But there was some optimism because Christy was still young, so therapy might reverse the damage and restore her impaired tongue. The family could consider implementing this method to save Christy. During the house search, police found letters reeking of lust and desire for Diane's young lover. This young lover had abandoned Diane because he already had a wife and children. He chose to return to his family instead of continuing with Diane. Law enforcement continued to send 2 investigators to Chandler, Arizona, to find this man before concluding the case. George Well and Paul Anton used their investigative experience to learn that Diane's former lover worked at a post office, and investigators interviewed him privately at his residence. He insisted on wanting his wife and children by his side, while openly describing the encounters that went beyond limits with his colleague Diane. At the same time, he also declared that his wife knew about that past and had forgiven him. The couple had reconciled, and he had nothing more to do with Diane. Diane's ex-lover also confirmed she had a .22 caliber pistol, but Diane still denied having that 3rd gun. In another development, Christy, Diane's older daughter, had gradually improved, remembered some details from the night of the incident, and confirmed there were no details related to a strange man with thick hair walking on the road. Police finally arrested Diane in February 1984, and her trial began in May of the same year, after gathering sufficient evidence. At the trial, Christy stood up to accuse her mother. After months of physical and mental therapy, the girl confirmed Diane was the one who had shot her. At the time of the trial, Diane was pregnant, so the court had to sentence her to life plus 50 years. She gave birth while serving her sentence. The baby Diane gave birth to was named Amy Elizabeth, then was adopted by another family and renamed Becky Babcock. Diane escaped from the Oregon Women's Correctional Center, where she was imprisoned just 3 years later. Police quickly found her at a house a few kilometers from the prison. With what she had done, Diane was denied clemency at 2 points in 2008 and 2010, and she was required to wait another decade before being able to submit a request for clemency from the law. Daniel, the youngest boy in the family who survived the serious crime, had to use a wheelchair for life, but he was very happy because he lived in the love of his adoptive parents, Fred and Joan Hugie, in 1986. And you, what do you think about this case? It's truly cruel and terrifying. Surely many people wonder why this mother could do this to her own children. Did she feel remorse when, despite her cruel actions, her young lover still didn't return? Please share your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to receive notifications about the most intriguing and fascinating cases on the Crime Channel.